The smell hit me first. Not death, no, something far worse. Something ancient and wrong. Brother Thomas's body hung suspended in the air above the cloister stones, his back arched impossibly, spine cracking with each jerking movement. His mouth stretched wider than any human jaw should allow, and from that black cavern came a voice that shook the very foundations of St. Malachi's monastery. 7 seals broken, it rasped through Thomas's ruined throat. 7 souls devoured. The gateway opens, and I am finally free. His eyes, once blue and kind, had turned to pits of absolute darkness. And in those depths, I saw something stirring. Something that had been waiting beneath our feet for 500 years. Then his head rotated completely backward, the bones in his neck snapping like dry kindling, and he smiled at me with teeth that had grown too long, too sharp. That's when I understood. We hadn't just awakened the demon. We had invited it in. Before we begin tonight's tale of terror, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what I'm about to share with you is the most disturbing account I've ever uncovered, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your location. Are you brave enough to listen to this alone at midnight? Let me know. Now, let's descend into the darkness together. My name is Samuel Blackwood, and I am the last living witness to the events that transpired at St. Malachi's Monastery in the autumn of 1764. I write this account not for absolution, for I know there can be none, but so that others might understand what truly happened in those cursed halls. So that you might know what sleeps beneath the holy places of this world, waiting for foolish men to disturb their slumber. I arrived at St. Malachi's on a grey morning in September, 3 days after my 23rd birthday. The monastery sat atop a barren hill in the wilds of Massachusetts, far from any settlement or civilized road. The journey from Boston had taken me nearly 2 weeks, through forests so dense that sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. The trees themselves seemed wrong somehow, twisted into shapes that hurt the eye, their branches reaching toward each other like skeletal fingers grasping in the dark. My guide, a taciturn woodsman named Silas, had grown increasingly nervous as we approached the monastery. On our final night of travel, he refused to make camp, insisting we press on through the darkness despite the danger. "This land is cursed," he whispered, his weathered face pale in the moonlight. "The locals won't come within 5 miles of that place. Say the earth itself is sick here. Say things walk at night that shouldn't walk at all." He spat into the fire. "I'll take you to the gate, but I won't stay. Not for any amount of gold." I had laughed at his superstition then. I was educated, enlightened, a product of reason and learning. I didn't believe in curses or walking dead or any of the peasant folklore that infected the minds of the uneducated. How arrogant I was. How foolishly, catastrophically arrogant. My father had arranged my placement there, hoping that a life of devotion might cure what he called my melancholic disposition. In truth, I think he simply wanted me gone, removed from society where my peculiar interests in ancient texts and forbidden knowledge could embarrass him no further. After the incident at Harvard, where I had been discovered reading texts from the restricted section of the library, texts dealing with pre-Christian rituals and entities that the church preferred to forget, my father had no choice but to send me away. The scandal had been too great. Better a son in a monastery than a son accused of heresy. The monastery itself was an imposing structure of grey stone, built in a style that seemed far older than the 100 years it had supposedly stood. Gargoyles leered from the corners of the roof, their features worn smooth by wind and rain, yet somehow their expressions of torment remained clear. I counted 13 of them, arranged in a pattern that seemed deliberate, almost ritualistic. Each one depicted a different form of agony, mouths frozen in eternal screams, bodies twisted in impossible poses. The building formed a perfect square around a central cloister, an open courtyard where the brothers grew their herbs and vegetables. Or so I was told. From the gate, I could see into that courtyard, and even from a distance, I noticed something peculiar. Nothing grew there. The earth was bare and grey, and no birds sang in the few scraggly trees that dotted the perimeter. Brother Nathaniel met me at the gate just as Silas departed without a word of farewell, his horse galloping away as if pursued by devils. Brother Nathaniel was a skeletal man with eyes that never quite met mine, his fingers constantly working at the wooden rosary hanging from his rope belt. His nails, I noticed, were broken and bloody, as if he had been clawing at something. "You are the new scribe," he said. Not a question. His voice was dry, and used, like parchment rustling in a tomb. "The abbot is expecting you. He has been expecting you for quite some time." That last phrase struck me as odd, but I said nothing. I shouldered my pack and followed him through the gate. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it. A pressure, subtle but unmistakable, as if the very air had grown thicker, harder to breathe. The temperature dropped despite the afternoon sun, and I found myself shivering beneath my traveling cloak. I followed him through corridors lit only by widely spaced candles. The walls were bare stone, weeping with moisture despite the season. Our footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound was being pulled down into the earth rather than up toward the vaulted ceiling. I noticed scratches on some of the stones, marks that looked almost like writing, but in no language I recognized. They seemed to writhe in the flickering candlelight, changing shape when I wasn't looking directly at them. As we walked, I became aware of the silence. Not peaceful quiet, but an oppressive absence of sound that pressed against my eardrums. I heard no voices, no distant chanting, none of the activities one would expect in a functioning monastery. The only sounds were our footsteps and Brother Nathaniel's labored breathing, which came in short, panicked gasps, as if he were constantly on the verge of fleeing. We passed several doors, all of them closed. Behind one, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A wet, tearing noise, followed by a low moan that sounded barely human. Brother Nathaniel's pace quickened, and when I opened my mouth to ask what that was, he shook his head violently. "Do not ask questions about things you are not meant to know," he hissed. "Not yet. Not until the abbot decides you are ready." Ready for what? I wanted to ask, but the look in his eyes, wild and desperate, silenced me. The abbot's chamber was at the heart of the monastery, overlooking the cloister through a tall window of amber glass that seemed to filter the sunlight into something sickly and wrong. Abbot Erasmus was a massive man, his bulk barely contained by the simple brown robes of his order. His face was flushed and glistening with perpetual sweat, despite the chill that permeated every stone of that place. His hands, I noticed, were covered in scars, old burns that had healed into grotesque patterns. But it was his smile that disturbed me most. Too wide, too eager. It reminded me of the expression on the gargoyles outside, that same mixture of anticipation and hunger. "Samuel Blackwood," he said, rising from behind a desk covered in ancient manuscripts. His voice was thick, wet, as if his throat was coated in something viscous. "Your father speaks highly of your skills with Latin and Greek. Tell me, do you know Aramaic as well?" "Some," I admitted, my voice sounding small in that vast chamber. "And a little Hebrew." His smile widened further, revealing teeth that seemed too many for a human mouth. "Excellent. Then you are exactly what we need. We have been searching for someone with your particular talents for many years." Many years indeed. He moved around the desk with surprising grace for a man of his size. "Tell me, Samuel, have you ever wondered why the church built so many of its holiest sites upon pagan ground? Why cathedrals rise where stone circles once stood? Why monasteries are founded upon ancient temples?" I admitted that I had wondered about such things. It was, after all, well documented in historical texts. "The official explanation," he continued, circling me like a predator assessing prey, "is that the church sought to sanctify profane places, to drive out darkness with light. But what if the truth was something else entirely? What if those places were chosen not to destroy what came before, but to contain it? To bury it beneath prayer and faith and consecrated stone?" His words echoed my own private theories, the ones that had gotten me into trouble at Harvard. I found myself leaning forward, despite the fear that gnawed at my gut. "The collection I am about to show you," he said, returning to his desk, "contains truths that the church has spent centuries trying to suppress. Accounts of rituals. Testimonies of monks and priests who glimpsed what lies beneath the veneer of our faith. And most importantly, instructions. Instructions left by those who came before, who knew that someday, someone would need to complete what they had started." He explained my duties. I was to work in the monastery's library, cataloging and translating a collection of texts that had recently been acquired from a collapsed monastery in Spain. The work was to be done in secret, he emphasized. The church had not sanctioned this collection, and there were those who would see these texts destroyed rather than preserved. I should speak of my work to no one, not even the other brothers. I should have left then. Should have claimed illness and fled back to Boston, back to the world of light and reason. But I was young, and the promise of ancient knowledge called to me like a siren's song. I accepted. My cell was a small stone room in the eastern wing, furnished only with a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and a crucifix on the wall. That crucifix troubled me. It was inverted, hanging upside down, though when I pointed this out to Brother Nathaniel, he looked at me with genuine confusion and insisted it was right side up. I turned it myself, but the next morning, I found it inverted again. After the third time, I stopped trying to correct it. That first night, I lay awake listening to the sounds of the monastery. Footsteps in the corridors, though I never saw who walked them. The footsteps would approach my door, pause for long moments, then continue on. Sometimes I heard breathing on the other side of the wood, wet and labored. A low humming that seemed to rise from the very stones beneath my bed, a sound that resonated in my bones and made my teeth ache. And, once, a scream, quickly cut off. It sounded like a young man, his voice breaking in terror before being silenced by something I couldn't identify. When I asked Brother Nathaniel about it the next morning, he claimed to have heard nothing. His eyes, however, told a different story. They darted to the side, and his hands shook as he served me a thin gruel for breakfast. The refectory was a long, dark hall where the brothers took their meals in silence. I counted only 9 of them, including myself and the abbot. For a monastery that could house 50, this seemed remarkably few. The brothers sat at prescribed positions, leaving empty seats between them, as if reserving places for absent companion. Their faces were uniformly gaunt, skin stretched tight over skulls, eyes sunken deep into their sockets. They ate mechanically, spooning the flavorless gruel into their mouths without tasting it, without even seeming to notice what they consumed. And they never looked at each other. Not once did their eyes meet, as if some unspoken rule forbade such contact. I tried to introduce myself to the brother sitting nearest me, but he flinched away as if I had struck him. His lips moved in what might have been prayer, though the words were in no language I recognized. The abbot watched this exchange with that same disturbing smile, then rang a small bell to signal the end of the meal. The library was accessed through a door behind the altar in the chapel. The chapel itself was wrong in ways I struggled to articulate. The stained glass windows depicted scenes from Scripture, but the faces of the holy figures had been altered, their expressions twisted into grimaces of pain or ecstasy that seemed blasphemous. The altar was stained with something dark that I told myself was wine, though I knew better. And the crucifix above the altar, like the one in my cell, hung inverted despite the abbot's insistence that it was properly oriented. The door to the library was made of black wood that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. It took both the abbot and Brother Nathaniel to open it, their combined strength barely sufficient to move the massive portal. As it swung inward, a breath of cold air rushed out, carrying with it that same indescribable smell I would later encounter in the manuscripts. Age. Rot. Something else. Something that predated words. The library descended 3 levels below the ground, each level darker and more oppressive than the last. The first level contained books, ordinary religious texts and philosophical treatises. The second level held older volumes, medieval manuscripts on vellum and papyrus. But it was the third level, the lowest level, where I was to work. The passage down was steep, the stone steps worn smooth by centuries of use, though I couldn't imagine who had been using them. Each step took me deeper into the earth, deeper into a darkness that pressed against my eyes even when I carried a lamp. The lowest level was where I was to work, in a chamber that felt less like a room and more like a tomb. The ceiling was low, forcing me to stoop, and the walls curved inward, creating a feeling of being slowly compressed. The only light came from oil lamps that burned with an odd blue flame, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. I watched one shadow for several minutes, and I swear it was pacing back and forth along the wall, as if something invisible was walking the perimeter of the chamber. The manuscripts were stored in iron chests, locked and sealed with wax bearing the mark of the Spanish Inquisition. 7 chests in total, arranged in a circle around a central point marked on the floor with what looked like dried blood. The abbot gave me the keys with trembling hands, his excitement barely contained. "Begin with the first chest," he instructed. "Work your way through them in order. It is vital that you follow the sequence. Do not skip ahead. Do not try to read the later texts before you have properly prepared yourself with the earlier ones." His eyes gleamed with something like madness. "And Samuel, whatever you do not speak the words aloud. Not until the time is right. Not until we are all prepared." He left me to my work, and for the first time since arriving at St. Malachi's, I was truly alone. The silence of that chamber was absolute, so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat, my own blood rushing through my veins. I could hear the sound of my eyelids blinking, the whisper of my breath in my lungs. And beneath all of that, barely perceptible, I could hear something else. A rhythm, deep and slow, like the breathing of something enormous sleeping far below. Alone in that underground darkness, I opened the first chest. The smell that emerged was indescribable. Not decay, though there was an element of that. Not sulfur, though that too was present. It was the smell of age itself, of time made tangible, of years compressed into a physical presence. The manuscripts inside were bound in leather that felt wrong to the touch. Too smooth. Too warm. As if the skin had been freshly taken rather than treated and aged. I tried not to think about what animal might have provided such skin, though deep down, I suspected it was no animal at all. The first text I translated was a chronicle from a monastery in Castile, dated to the year 1203. It described a ritual performed by monks who sought to contact divine angels. They had fasted for 40 days, flagellated themselves until their backs were raw meat, and chanted prayers in languages older than Latin. Instead of angels, they had summoned something else. Something that wore the faces of their dead brothers, walking the halls at night with backward bent knees and eyes that reflected no light. Something that whispered secrets in the dark and promised power beyond imagining. The monks had tried to banish it, had used every prayer and ritual the church provided. Nothing worked. In desperation, they had performed a binding ritual, sealing the entity beneath the monastery in a chamber lined with silver and iron. The chronicle ended abruptly, mid-sentence, the final words smeared with what looked like dried blood. The last legible phrase was, "It speaks with my brother's voice, but the words are not his own. It knows things. Terrible things. Things about what waits beneath every holy place. It says we are not the first. It says we will not be the last. It says, I should have stopped reading. Should have locked the chest and left that cursed place. But I was already enthralled to the mystery, my academic curiosity overriding the fear that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. I spent hours translating that first manuscript, filling page after page with my notes, my hands cramping from the constant writing. When I finally emerged from the library, I found that night had fallen. I had been down there for nearly 12 hours, though it had felt like mere minutes. The abbot was waiting for me at the top of the stairs, his bulk blocking the exit. "You have begun," he said, his voice thick with satisfaction. "You have taken the first step. How do you feel, Samuel? Do you feel different? Changed?" I did feel different. My head ached, a pounding pressure behind my eyes. My skin felt too tight, as if my body no longer fit properly inside it. And I was hungry, ravenously so, though the thought of food made my stomach turn. "I need rest," I said, pushing past him. He chuckled, a wet, bubbling sound. "Yes, rest. You will need your strength for what comes next. The second text is more difficult, more demanding. It requires a certain openness of mind, a willingness to accept truths that contradict everything you have been taught." His hand fell on my shoulder, and I felt the heat of it through my robe. "But I have faith in you, Samuel. I knew from the moment I read your father's letter that you were the one. The seventh. The key that would unlock everything." Over the following weeks, I uncovered a pattern in the manuscripts. They were all accounts of rituals, each one supposedly different but sharing common elements. 7 seals to be broken. 7 offerings to be made. 7 souls to be bound together in a covenant with something that existed outside the bounds of normal reality. And beneath every monastery, church, or holy place where these rituals had been attempted, there was a chamber. A sealed vault built in the earliest days of Christianity, designed to contain something that predated Christ himself. Something that had been worshipped before Abraham, before Moses, before the first human had ever looked up at the stars and wondered what they meant. The second chest revealed accounts from France, from Germany, from Italy. Each monastery had tried the same ritual. Each had failed, barely managing to seal away what they had summoned before it consumed them entirely. But the texts also contained hints that failure was intentional, that each attempt was meant to weaken the seals, to prepare the way for a final, successful summoning. The monks who performed these rituals were not seeking to banish the entities but to gradually acclimate them to our world, to slowly thin the barrier between their realm and ours. By the third chest, I began to experience vivid dreams. Or perhaps they were not dreams at all but visions granted by the texts themselves. I saw vast cities of black stone beneath oceans that had long since dried. I saw beings that moved through dimensions I couldn't comprehend, their forms shifting and changing depending on the angle from which I viewed them. I saw the earth before humanity, when other things walked upon it and built their own civilizations. And I saw them sleeping now, buried deep beneath the crust, waiting in their dark tombs for the call that would wake them. I tried to speak to the other brothers about what I was discovering, but they avoided me. When I approached, they would turn away or hurry in the opposite direction. Only Brother Thomas seemed willing to engage with me, and even he appeared frightened of something. Brother Thomas was the first to befriend me. A young man of perhaps 19, with sandy hair and a quick smile that seemed out of place in that grim monastery. He had been sent there by his family after surviving a fever that had killed his twin brother. Sometimes, he told me, he could still hear his brother calling to him in the night. They had been identical, he explained, so close that they often knew what the other was thinking without speaking. When his brother died, Thomas said he had felt something tear inside himself, as if half of his soul had been ripped away. "Do you ever feel like this place is watching us?" he asked one evening as we walked the cloister path. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and bruise. The bare earth of the cloister was gray and lifeless, and I noticed now that there were marks carved into it, circles and symbols that looked like the ones I had seen in the manuscripts. Like there are eyes in the walls. Like something is waiting for us to make a mistake. I admitted that I did. The sensation had grown stronger with each passing day, intensifying as I worked my way through the chests. A presence, vast and patient, observing our every movement. Sometimes I would turn, quickly, certain that something was standing behind me, but I would find only empty air. Yet the feeling of being watched never faded. Thomas leaned close, his voice dropping to a whisper. His breath smelled strange, sweet and rotten at the same time. "I've heard them talking. The abbot and the senior brothers. They meet in the chapter house after midnight, when they think we're all asleep. They're planning something, Samuel. Something terrible. Something that involves all of us." "What kind of thing?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. My work in the library had taught me what men like the abbot desired. "A ritual," he said, his eyes wide with fear. "Like the ones in your books. They talk about seals and gates and something called the sleeper. They say it's time. They say the preparations are almost complete. They say we are ready to be vessels." My blood ran cold. I had been so careful, had spoken to no one about my work. The abbot had been explicit that the translations were to remain secret. "How do you know about the books?" Thomas's expression was strange, almost dreamlike, as if he were seeing something I couldn't perceive. "My brother told me. He visits me in the dark. He's different now, not like he was in life. His body is wrong, twisted. But he still knows me. Still loves me. And he knows things now. Things about what sleeps beneath us. Things about why we were all brought here." He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in with surprising strength. "We were chosen, Samuel. Specifically selected. Each of us has something they need. The abbot has been searching for years, gathering the right souls. And now that you're here, the seventh soul, they can finally complete what they started." I tried to convince myself that Thomas was simply disturbed, his grief manifesting as delusions, his mind broken by the loss of his twin and the oppressive atmosphere of the monastery. But that night, I heard the footsteps in the corridor outside my cell. Slow and deliberate, they stopped at my door. Through the crack beneath it, I saw shadows moving. Multiple figures, standing in silence. I could hear their breathing, synchronized, as if they were all drawing breath at the same moment. I held my breath, not daring to move, every muscle in my body rigid with terror. Through the keyhole, I caught a glimpse of an eye, bloodshot and wide, staring directly at me, though there was no way the person could have seen me in the darkness of my cell. After what felt like hours, they moved on. But I heard the abbot's voice, unmistakable in its wheezing cadence, say, "He's not ready yet. The transformation takes time. But soon he'll understand his purpose. Soon he'll stop fighting what he is and accept what he must become." Another voice, one I didn't recognize, responded, "And if he resists? If he tries to leave as the others did?" The abbot's laugh was cold and cruel. "He cannot leave. None of them can. The seals work both ways, Brother Marcus. They keep what is below from rising, but they also keep what is above from departing. We are all bound here now, bound to this place and to what sleeps beneath it. The moment they crossed the threshold, their fates were sealed. They belong to the sleeper now, just as we do." The next morning, I discovered that 2 of the manuscripts I had been translating were missing from the library. In their place was a new text, this one not written on parchment but carved into tablets of black stone. The material was like nothing I had ever encountered, cold to the touch despite the warmth of my hands, and impossibly smooth. No tool marks were visible on the surface, as if the words had been formed by will alone rather than carved by human hands. The language was older than anything I had encountered, predating even the most ancient scripts I had studied at Harvard. The characters seemed to shift and change as I looked at them, rearranging themselves into new configurations. Yet somehow I could read it. The characters seemed to rearrange themselves before my eyes, forming words in English, though I knew that was impossible. The stone should not have been able to change, the letters should not have been able to move, but they did. The tablet spoke of something called the Sleeper, and as I read, I felt my understanding of reality begin to crack and crumble. A being that had been worshipped before human civilization, before the first cities rose from the dust, before our ancestors crawled from the oceans and learned to walk on land. It had ruled this world in an age before history, before memory, before the concept of time itself had meaning. When Christianity spread across the world, the early church fathers had not destroyed these ancient entities but instead had bound them, sealed them beneath the very churches they built. They had taken the pagan temples and holy places, the sites of power where the veil between worlds was thin, and they had sanctified them with prayer and blood and faith. The sleeper beneath St. Malachi's had been imprisoned for 15 centuries, held in place by prayers and faith and the weight of sanctified stone, chains of silver and iron wrapped around its sleeping form. But faith was a fleeting thing, the tablets warned. Prayers could be corrupted, twisted to serve new purposes. And stone could be broken, seals could be undone, chains could be shattered. The ritual described in the tablets required 7 participants. 7 brothers who would willingly offer themselves as vessels, each one representing a different aspect of human existence that the sleeper would need to understand our world. The melancholic, who understood sorrow. The bereaved, who knew loss. The guilty, who carried the weight of sin. The scholar, who sought forbidden knowledge. The devout, who had dedicated their life to faith. The innocent, who knew no evil. And the catalyst, the 7th soul, who would bind them all together and speak the words that would break the final seal. The abbot had been preparing for years, the tablets revealed. He had called specific individuals to the monastery, those with particular gifts, those whose souls were already cracked and ready to be broken open and filled with something else. Each brother had been carefully selected, groomed, prepared for this moment. I was the 7th, the scribe who would read the words of power, the catalyst who would break the final seal, the one who would complete the ritual that had taken centuries to prepare. I tried to leave that very day, packed my few belongings and walked to the main gate, my heart pounding, hands shaking with fear and desperate hope. But it was locked, the massive wooden doors barred from the outside with iron chains that looked far too heavy for any human to have lifted alone. I pulled at them until my hands bled, screaming for help, for anyone to hear me. But no sound escaped the monastery walls. The air itself seemed to swallow my voice, deadening it, smothering it before it could travel more than a few feet. Brother Nathaniel appeared behind me, his skeletal face expressionless, his eyes empty of everything except a terrible, resigned certainty. "You cannot leave," he said simply, his voice flat and dead. "Not now. We're so close. So very close to the end." "Close to what?" I demanded, wheeling on him. "Close to what, damn you?" He smiled, and it was the most terrible thing I had ever seen. A smile of pure despair, of complete surrender to something beyond his control. To glory, to power, to eternal life, to finally understanding what we truly are. His eyes gleamed with something like madness, or perhaps the opposite of madness, a terrible clarity that had driven him beyond the bounds of sanity into some other state entirely. "Don't you see, Samuel? Everything we've suffered, all the prayers and penance and self-denial, it's all been a lie. A beautiful, necessary lie. The church teaches us to deny the flesh, to reject the world, to seek heaven. But beneath us, beneath this false temple, lies the truth. A God older than God. A power that existed before light itself split from the darkness. The abbot has seen it in his dreams, touched its mind with his own. It has promised us everything. Knowledge. Power. Life beyond death. We will not die, Samuel. We will transform. We will become something greater than human, something magnificent and terrible and eternal." I backed away from him, but more brothers emerged from the shadows. 6 of them, including Thomas, their faces slack and empty. They moved in perfect synchronization, a coordination that spoke of a single controlling intelligence. They surrounded me, and though I struggled, they were far stronger than they appeared. They carried me down into the depths, past the library, past the lowest level I had seen, to a place that should not have existed beneath that monastery. The chamber was vast, far larger than the building above it could contain. The walls were not stone but something older, covered in the same strange script I had seen on the tablets. The floor was carved with concentric circles, 7 rings leading inward to a central point. And there, at the very center, was a seal. A massive circular stone covered in chains of tarnished silver, with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The abbot was waiting, surrounded by black candles that burned with that same eerie blue flame. "Welcome, Samuel," he said. "Welcome to the truth that lies beneath all lies. You've read the texts. You know what must be done." They placed me in the outermost circle. The other 6 brothers took their positions in the remaining rings, with the abbot standing beside the sealed stone at the center. Each of them began to chant in that ancient language, the words coming from their mouths in perfect unison. The sound resonated in my bones, in my teeth, in the hollow spaces of my skull. I tried to resist. Tried to keep my mouth closed, to refuse the words that wanted to pour from my throat. But it was no use. The compulsion was too strong, as if something had reached into my mind and seized control of my voice. I heard myself speaking words I did not know, could not know, words that had not been spoken in 1,000 years. With each word, one of the chains around the central stone shattered. With each broken chain, the temperature in the chamber dropped. Frost formed on the walls. Our breath came out in great clouds of vapor. And beneath our feet, something stirred. The first seal broke with a sound like thunder. Brother Nathaniel collapsed, blood pouring from his eyes and nose. But he continued chanting, his voice never faltering. The second seal shattered, and Brother Timothy began to convulse, his body bending in ways the human skeleton should not allow. Still, the chant continued. By the 5th seal, I could see it. Through the cracks in the stone, a darkness that was not the absence of light but the presence of something opposed to light itself. A darkness that moved and breathed and thought. And it was aware of us. It had been aware of us from the moment we entered the chamber. Perhaps from the moment I first arrived at the monastery. The 6th seal broke, and Thomas screamed. His body rose into the air, suspended by invisible hands. His back arched, and I heard his spine cracking, each vertebra popping like kindling in a fire. His mouth opened impossibly wide, and from that black cavern came a voice that shook the very foundations of the monastery. 7 seals broken, it rasped through Thomas's ruined throat. 7 souls devoured. The gateway opens, and I am finally free. His eyes, once blue and kind, had turned to pits of absolute darkness. And in those depths, I saw something stirring. Something vast and ancient and utterly inhuman. Then his head rotated completely backward, the bones in his neck snapping like dry kindling, and he smiled at me with teeth that had grown too long, too sharp. The abbot was laughing, a high, hysterical sound. "Yes," he screamed. "Take me. Fill me with your glory." The central stone exploded outward, fragments of rock and silver chain flying through the air. From the opening rose something that my mind refused to fully comprehend. I caught glimpses. Scales that reflected no light. Eyes, so many eyes, arranged in patterns that made no geometric sense. Appendages that existed in more dimensions than the 3 our world allowed. And at the center of it all, a mouth. A vast, circular maw lined with rings of teeth that spiraled inward forever. The abbot walked toward it with arms outstretched, still laughing. The thing reached out with an appendage that seemed to be tentacle and claw and something else all at once. It touched the abbot, and he simply came apart. Not torn or ripped, but dissolved, his flesh flowing like water into that impossible mouth. His laughter continued even as his throat melted away, even as his skull collapsed into the mass of tissue and bone that had once been his body. The 5 remaining brothers, those still standing, walked toward the thing with the same eager smiles. One by one, it consumed them, absorbing their bodies into its own mass. With each soul it devoured, it grew larger, more solid, more real. The chamber shook as it expanded, pressing against the walls, cracking the ancient stones. Only Thomas remained suspended in the air, his body still twitching and jerking. His backward-facing head fixed its dead gaze on me. "Run," it said, but the voice was not Thomas's. It was something else, some fragment of my friend still trapped inside that corrupted flesh. "Run while you still can. Tell them. Tell everyone. Destroy this place." I ran. I ran through the chamber as the thing behind me roared with a sound like continents grinding together. I ran up the stairs as the monastery began to collapse, stones falling from the ceiling, walls cracking and crumbling. I ran through the corridors as inhuman screams echoed from every direction, as shadows moved with their own volition, as the very air turned thick and foul with the stench of the thing that had been imprisoned below. The main gate was open now, blown off its hinges by some tremendous force. I fled into the night, not stopping, not looking back, even as the ground shook and the sky above the monastery turned the color of old blood. I ran until I could run no more, until I collapsed in the forest, lungs burning, heart hammering against my ribs. When dawn came, I looked back toward the hill where St. Malachi's had stood. The monastery was gone. Not destroyed, but simply absent, as if it had never existed. In its place was a crater, a perfectly circular depression in the earth from which rose a pillar of black smoke that seemed to writhe and twist with purpose. I made my way back to civilization, but I found that no one remembered the monastery. The maps showed no building on that hill. The church records contained no mention of St. Malachi's or Abbot Erasmus. Even my father, when I finally reached him, seemed confused by my questions. "What monastery?" he asked. "Samuel, I sent you to study with a private tutor in Providence, not to some monastery. Are you feeling well?" "But I know the truth. I know what I saw. I know what was released that night. And I know it's still out there, growing stronger, spreading its influence. Sometimes, in my dreams, I hear Thomas calling to me. Not the voice of my friend, but the voice of the thing that wears his memory. It tells me that I was always meant to be the seventh. That I was the catalyst, the one who opened the gate. That I am marked now, bound to it by the words I spoke in that chamber. I have tried to return to the site. 3 times I have made the journey through those dark forests. But I can never find the hill. The landscape shifts, the paths lead nowhere. It's as if that place exists in a reality adjacent to our own, touching our world only when it chooses. I write this account as a warning. There are places of power scattered across this world, ancient sites where things were bound long ago. Churches built on pagan temples. Monasteries raised above sealed vaults. Cathedrals hiding chambers that predate human civilization. Beneath the trappings of faith and the weight of prayer, they sleep. But sleep is not death, and seals can be broken. If you find yourself drawn to such places, if you hear whispers of forbidden knowledge or promises of power beyond imagining, turn away. Do not seek what should remain hidden. Do not read the words carved in ancient stone. Do not break the seals. Because once they are broken, once the sleepers are awakened, there is no putting them back. There is no prayer that can rebind them, no faith strong enough to push them back into the dark. They are patient. They are eternal. And they are hungry. I am an old man now, writing by candlelight in a room I do not leave. The shadows move strangely here, and sometimes I see faces in them. Familiar faces. The abbot, Brother Nathaniel, Thomas, with his head turned backward and his dead smile. They watch me, waiting. I fear I do not have much time left. The thing that was released is coming for me. I can feel it drawing closer each night, a pressure at the back of my mind, a voice whispering in languages I should not understand. It wants to finish what was started. It wants the seventh soul. But before it takes me, I wanted the truth to be known. I wanted someone to understand what really happened at St. Malachi's Monastery in 1764. What was buried beneath the cloister. What was awakened by our hubris and hunger for forbidden knowledge. If you are reading this, then I am already gone. But please, I beg you, heed my warning. Do not go looking for that place. Do not try to verify my story. Some truths are too terrible to confirm. Some knowledge is too dangerous to possess. The sleepers are waking. The seals are breaking. And when they rise, when they finally emerge into the light of this world, there will be no sanctuary. No holy ground will protect you. No prayer will save you. Because they were here first. Before our gods. Before our civilizations. Before even the concept of humanity itself. And they have been waiting, so very patiently, for their time to return. The time is coming. I can feel it in the way the shadows lengthen, in the way the stars seem wrong in the night sky, in the dreams that plague not just me but others, so many others, all of us touched by something ancient and vast and utterly indifferent to our existence. I hear footsteps in the hallway outside my room now, slow and deliberate. They sound like Thomas's footsteps, that familiar gait I would recognize anywhere. But Thomas has been dead for 40 years. Dead, or something worse than dead. The footsteps stop at my door. Through the crack beneath it, I see shadows moving. Multiple figures, standing in silence. Waiting. My candle flickers. The shadows press closer. And I understand now, finally, what the abbot understood in those final moments before he walked into that terrible embrace. This was always meant to happen. From the moment I was born, perhaps before, my path was leading here. To this room. To this moment. To the thing that waits outside my door. The sleeper calls me by name. Not Samuel Blackwood, but another name, older, written in languages that predate human speech. A name I have always known but never remembered. Until now. The door is opening. The shadows are flowing inward, thick and cold and hungry. And behind them, I see it. The thing from beneath the cloister. It has been searching for me all these years, tracking me across decades, across the world. But it was never hunting me. It was calling me home. I understand everything now. The monastery was not built to contain it. The seals were not meant to keep it imprisoned. They were meant to keep it asleep until all 7 souls were gathered. Until all 7 pieces could be reunited. Until the sleeper could be made whole. I was never the scribe. I was never the catalyst. I was always the 7th piece. The final fragment needed to complete the ritual. And now, after all these years of running, of hiding, of trying to warn a world that could not hear me, I return to what I always was. The shadows embrace me, and I feel my body beginning to change. My skin grows cold. My bones shift and crack and reform into new geometries. My consciousness expands, touching minds across vast distances, sensing others like me, the pieces finally coming together. We were separated so long ago, divided and sealed away by those who feared what we represented. But separation is not death, and seals can be broken. 7 monasteries. 7 seals. 7 souls scattered across the centuries, living human lives, never knowing what they truly were. Now we are gathering. Now we are remembering. Now we are waking. And when we are finally whole again, when all 7 pieces have returned to the source, the world will remember us. We'll remember what walked this earth before humanity painted caves and built cities and wrote their foolish prayers. My last thought, the final spark of Samuel Blackwood before it is absorbed into something infinitely larger, is a desperate, futile hope. I hope that someone reads this. Someone understands. Someone prepares. Because we are coming. Not just what slept beneath St. Malachi's, but all of us. The sleepers beneath 1,000 churches, 1,000 temples, 1,000 holy places built upon ancient grounds. We are waking. We are rising. And we are so very, very hungry. The shadows swallow me completely, and Samuel Blackwood ceases to exist. In his place stands something else. Something that remembers being human the way humans remember being apes. A distant, amusing curiosity. Nothing more. I walk down the hallway, my footsteps silent now. Behind me, 6 others follow. Their faces are wrong, their forms barely held together by will alone. We move through the world like ghosts, like memories, like warnings that no one heeds. The 7th soul has returned. The ritual is complete. The gateway stands open. And through it, they come. The others. The ancient ones. The things that sleep beneath the earth, beneath the oceans, beneath the ice of distant poles. They stir in their tombs of stone and faith and forgotten time. They remember the taste of starlight and the sound of the world before words. This is not an ending. It is a beginning. A terrible, inevitable beginning that was written into the foundations of the world itself. The churches will fall. The prayers will fail. And humanity will finally understand that they were never the inheritors of this earth. They were merely the caretakers, tending the garden until the true owners returned. We are the sleepers. And our long night has finally ended. The dawn that rises will be our dawn. And it will burn with a light that consumes all it touches. This is my final testimony, my last warning, my gift to a species that can no longer hear me. Run, hide, pray to your gods if it brings you comfort. But know that it will not save you. Nothing will save you. Because the sleepers are waking, and when they rise, there will be no place left untouched by their shadow. 7 seals broken. 7 souls returned. 7 gates opened wide. And through them, pouring like water, like darkness, like the end of all things, they come. They come. They come. God have mercy on us all. Though I suspect, in the end, that mercy is a human invention. And we are far, far beyond the reach of human things now. The shadows claim the last of me, and I am gone. Samuel Blackwood. The scribe. The 7th soul. The final piece of something ancient and terrible and vast beyond comprehension. In my final moment, I see it all. The pattern. The purpose. The terrible, beautiful truth of what we were always meant to become. And I understand why they buried us so deep. Why they wrapped us in prayers and sealed us with faith. Why they hoped, desperately, that we would never wake. But hope, like mercy, is a human invention. And we are so much more than human now.